Hello. Welcome to the first podcast of Back to Democracy. I started this podcast because of all the chaos going on in the world. I feel that we need to come back to some kind of truth and truth through dialogue, asking tough questions and having open conversation. Um, it's actually um, very Canadian like that. My first guest is going to be RCMP officer, something that is it was and is quintessential Canadian and with our values. So today on the podcast we have Sergeant Chris Backus, who is an operations NCO for the Sunshine Coast RCMP detachment. He has 18 years of service with the RCMP and has been posted to several small, medium, and large detachments within BC. He has also worked for the United Nations in the Ivory Coast of West Africa. Sergeant Backus has a master's degree from Royal Roads University in conflict management and interest-based negotiations. He has served as a subject matter expert for the RCMP in the areas of conflict management and mediation for several years. So we'd like to welcome Chris Backus. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Jonathan.
So I've done a lot of research on you, and your big ploy is the I guess your statement is called the Yellow Stripe Protest, and it's going around the RCMP all across Canada. Before we get into that, and me coming out of broadcasting out of New Brunswick, we're going to touch on the Moncton shootings and a couple other things that are going on in the RCMP right now, talking about having a civilian oversight, unionizing the RCMP and whatnot, and we'll get to your protest. So we'll start with that and then come back to that. But my first question is you've been in the RCMP for 18 years. Why did you want to be an RCMP officer, or what got you to be interested in the RCMP, I guess?
Well, I always felt that I felt a certain sense of professional purpose, helping and protecting Canadians. My father was also an RCMP officer, so I grew up, in that culture. But there just became over the years a very personal wanting connection to be not only a police officer for Canadians, but also to be part of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When I joined the RCMP, I felt that there was a tradition behind the RCMP. There was a level of excellence behind the RCMP, and it was an honor as I sought after that dream and that goal to finally be hired with the RCMP. And since then, I've been posted to several different communities within British Columbia and even overseas, and it has been an honor to serve Canadians in that regard for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because I was running the other morning thinking about doing this podcast and how I could make it as great as possible or not screw it up, just to try to get as much audience as possible. And all I thought about is when I was a kid, I would think that you and I would be close to the same age. When you thought about Canada, why I say quintessential Canada is because that's what everybody thinks about Canada. If you anybody from around the world, you think of the loonie or a beaver, or like certain symbols that are Canada. Years ago, it was always the RCMP officer, and when I was a kid, it was you felt safe. You just knew that you would come to. And in my area of Moncton, they started in the mid 90s is when it went from the Moncton Police Force to the RCMP becoming there. And I think from the chaos in the world that has happened is that I'd like to see us come back to that. And that, in saying that, that comes back to what you're protesting right now. So maybe this yellow stripe protest, or what I've read is that some people are calling the RCMP now almost the Walmart police. Maybe touch on and tell everybody what, especially in New Brunswick, because I'm sure out west you're getting a lot more attention. But here, what's going on? Why are people ripping stripes off their pants?
Well, I think I couldn't answer that question by saying it's just any one particular reason. But I think the general spirit of why members have decided to remove their stripes off their pants is the members that are in the RCMP who have joined to serve Canadians and do an excellent job realize that we've come to this point where we can't continue to do this the way we've been doing it anymore, and we're starting to see our service delivery suffer to these Canadians. And so it really depends, if you ask Mounties from West Coast to East Coast, there are a plethora of different reasons that they've chosen to take the stripes off their pants. Let me touch on a couple though, for sure. I mean, one of the things.
Well, okay, sorry. Before you get into that, when did you first start taking? So you can get into it, but when did you first start taking stripes? When did the process first start, and when did you first start taking stripes off? Because I mean, there is a lot of layers to what you're saying, and there's a lot of layers to a lot of things. But when did you start it exactly? And what started the ball rolling with this?
Well, so really for myself, one of the things that came to a head was when the government announced their pay increase of 1.25% to the RCMP. There had been a lot of other things that had been culminating. I've seen the RCMP been stripped from resources. I've seen the RCMP been stripped from money for equipment, stripped from money from training, do more with less for many, many years. And now we're having this problem recruiting and retaining good police officers. They're leaving our force. They're going for other municipal police departments, paying considerably more money for the annual salary. And when they came, we have a broken promise with the federal government when it comes to pay. And so when they came back and said, well, here's your 1.25 for every year that you were without a contract, it was really such a slap in the face that it was sort of a straw that broke the camel's back for me. And I decided, listen, I'm going to call up my member of parliament. I'm going to attend their office in uniform, and I'm going to express my frustrations very bluntly to them about why I feel this has come to a halt. As I contacted the media to do that, they had alluded to me, well, there are some other members that are, starting to take off their stripe, and we decided at that point to just sort of unite and become consistent in our form of protest.
So, and it's funny you say that, because from the research I've done, you guys, you're 72 out of 80 police forces in Canada as far as pay, because the pay is where you've started this at. Although there are a lot of other layers that come to it, and something along the lines of, it's not policy, but it was a based on precedent that set in like Quebec, that you guys are supposed to be top 3 or 5 in Canada as far as pay, and that all came down when you guys were tossing around becoming unionized, and they didn't want you to be unionized, so. To go with the stature of being an RCMP officer, they go, well, you guys to have all this are also paid very well as well, and now you've dipped below that, and hence why you're making the protest.
Well, I mean, you're commenting on one pay issue, which is pay.
Yeah.
We were supposed to remain within the top 3. That understanding was broken years before we went without a pay contract. We've only asked for, and we still are only asking when it comes to pay, consistency. Consistency with what we're as we look across the street or across the way and see our jurisdictional police forces that work alongside us. What are they doing? And the RCMP senior management, they'll come back to you and they'll say, well, if you look at the total package, we're actually still quite good. And if you look at the medical benefits and the dental benefits and the massages and everything else you get through your plan, what a bunch of crap, to be quite frank, we make $30,000 less on average per rank than Vancouver City Police, and I'll tell you, you can get a lot of root canals for $30,000. So, it's pay is only one thing, and what you have to understand is there's a lot other as important, if not more important. There's also safety issues. There's resourcing issues. There's bullying and harassment issues. And we all do come to a common ground because as these things collect and as they're interconnected to one another, and what it results in is a police force that is no longer superior, a police force full of excellent men and women on the front lines who are used to delivering this first-class Cadillac service to the Canadians. And they just simply can't do it anymore. They're getting tired, they're getting frustrated, and they're feeling their own capabilities start to wean here. And that's, I think, where the Mounties are crying out for help, saying we don't want to fail at what we're doing. We don't want to go backwards here, but we've just got no other choice but to speak up. That's what the frontline Mounties are doing.
Yeah, well,
the senior Mounties are not.
Yeah, well, and that's from what I've read too, is that there's, in touching on that, there's a lot of Mounties that are jumping over to City Vancouver or Victoria Police or what have you.
Even the senior Mounties. Just last week you had Chief Superintendent Ray Bernardis. He's very high ranking, and I know him. He's a very, very talented and forward-thinking leader. The force will not be the same without him. And he has left his career at, I believe, 25 years, very early for a senior ranking officer, and he's joined the Oak Bay Police. And let me tell you, he's getting a heck of a raise and some freedom on how he runs his police department,
Oh, so just to let the people know in the Maritimes or Atlantic Canada, so this is out in Victoria?
Be out in Vancouver Island.
Vancouver Island.
That's just one of many examples, but you're seeing it all the time.
Yeah, and I'm only touching on the pay because like you, it's not just pay, but we live in a world where pay is kind of reflective on the level of expertise or your knowledge or the services that you bring. And so the RCMP with trying to, where they had the bravado before, I guess, and trying to get that back, that's one of the issues. Now, all the other issues that you touched on, we're going to get to, because it wouldn't.
Well, let me say this much. If you're the federal government of Canada, or you're the Treasury Board of Canada, or you're you're the commissioner of the RCMP, pay is actually your quickest and easiest fix. All the other things are going to require cultural change. That will take time, and that's very difficult. Cultural change for those who are educated in it are extremely hard things to bring about. All you really need to do is open the purse strings and pay your RCMP just a fair and equitable wage, and you would get a small win right off the bat. And let me tell you, they say, well, where is we going to get that kind of money? I mean, if the federal government can bail out Bombardier in the billions, while their CEOs get bonuses in the millions, I'm sure Mr. Ralph Goodale and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau can find the money to pay their Mounties an equitable and fair wage.
Well, and that's an interesting point that I was going to get to, but we'll get to it right now. It's funny because when the budget Trudeau's gone into debt, had two budgets, both of them going almost $30 billion in debt, and he hasn't taxed the rich. And this year they were saying because he didn't want to go after the rich because he wanted to stay aligned with Trump, and he was scared that he needed to stay aligned with Trump, and then if he taxed the rich because Trump was going to give them such a tax break in the States, that you'd see a lot of businesses go to the States. In saying that, Trump and the Republicans in the States are also big on protection services. And yet, you guys don't see too much in that $30 billion going running deficits. You guys don't see too much of that extra money, which would help your cause and kind of go from there.
Sorry, is it? So what's what's the question? Sorry.
No, I'm just commenting on the fact. I'm just reiterating what you're saying is to put your money where the mouth is. And
well, it's interesting. I am reluctant to talk politics in uniform.
Yeah.
And police shouldn't be involved in politics.
No, yeah.
The police should be involved in policing. And so I find it a disappointment and almost a quasi disaster that we're having to do this to get better anyway. Because with these podcasts, my interviews on the news, they're all political messages. And it's a shame that we have to get involved in politics on this front. It's a shame that we have to expose ourselves to the public that we're internally breaking apart like this. We should be focusing our energy on policing.
Well, yeah, and I have a bunch of buddies who, and like I talked a long time ago, how the RCMP when I was younger, you just had this bravado, and you felt safe, and that's Canada. I mean, we're at the 100th anniversary of Vimy Ridge, and we're very proud of that, and we should be very proud of the RCMP, and that's kind of coming down a bit, and I lost my train of thought here for a second.
Well, let me just sort of take a look at, let me sort of make a summation for you that I think will be a good analogy for your viewers.
Yeah.
Everything, there's so many different facets of the RCMP that are important to optimal function that are falling apart. But the men and women in the RCMP, they're very, in the front lines, I'll tell you, they're very, very talented people. I work with some incredibly smart people that I consider it an honor to go to work beside every day. But now here's the analogy that I think will help your listeners understand where we're coming from. Wayne Gretzky was probably one of the most naturally talented hockey players of all time, or at least debatably we could talk about that. If Wayne Gretzky came into the NHL and went to the Edmonton Oilers, and he was bullied and intimidated by the coach, he was given a wage that was considerably less than the Vancouver Canucks, who were all over across the way asking for him to come play for their team. If every time that we've sent Gretzky onto the ice, we put him out there shorthanded with nobody to play with, he's only shorthanded on the penalty kill rather than the power play. And oh, by the way, when he went out onto the ice, we gave him a crappy pair of leather skates that were the cheapest ever and a broken hockey stick. Gretzky simply would not have flourished and performed into the hockey player that he was, which essentially and debatably was the best player of all time, or one of them. That's exactly what's going on in the RCMP. There's no lack of talent in the RCMP. The frontline members there are talented and willing, but it's the broken systems that are pushing them to the brink of failure. And that's the message we're getting out. That in itself is the No Strike campaign that we're talking about here. Pay being just, essentially one of them. The federal government of Canada, the Treasury Board, and most importantly, the senior management of the RCMP, they don't get it. They're not getting it. They don't understand how critical the RCMP is at this particular moment in time. They dismiss things as if there's really essentially no problem, that everything's a hunky-dory sort of thing. Now, these last 3 reports that came out last week, I think politically it puts a little pressure on them. But I'm almost convinced at this point, to be honest with you, Jonathan, they don't get it, and they don't want to get it.
So why should we care more about the RCMP? Like, why don't we just go all to like city or policing
jurisdictional
services?
police.
Yeah, so jurisdictional police force. Like, why don't we do? Why is it so great to hold on to the RCMP?
Well, that's the uncomfortable and very good question. I'll give you my opinion on that right now. I don't think we should. And this will be very provocative and controversial even amongst the frontline members. There are many of them that have so much pride, as do I, for the RCMP. They want to wear the uniform. They want the RCMP to be the better organization that they believe in. So do I. The difference for me is I don't have faith. I don't have faith that the government of Canada will fix the RCMP, and I don't have faith that the senior management will start speaking out about the truths of the RCMP. So then let's bring it back to what you just said. I think that the quicker fix here is for the RCMP to get out of contract policing. I think that if I was the premier of some of these provinces, I'll speak for British Columbia because I'm here.
Yeah.
If I was Premier Christy Clark, if I was a mayor of Surrey, the Big Five we call here, Surrey, North Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, Langley.
The Greater Vancouver area.
Greater Vancouver areas. I would be seriously considering discontinuing my contract relationship with the RCMP. They have done nothing but, been in the media for just whether it's harassment or whatever. It's hard to the way that they spend money is complicating for the municipalities. It's not controlled properly. I would seriously be considering creating a jurisdictional police force. Now, whether that's a provincial police force or municipal police forces, I mean, that's to be ironed out in the weeds. But I will tell you, there will be a lot of talented men and women, frontline Mounties, that will strongly consider going right across if the wage was equitable, the conditions were better, if they were even comparable to the municipal police forces that we're looking right across the street at and going, wow, like their uniforms are better. There's 2 per car. I mean, Vancouver City Police.
Well, and you mentioned just having as a top management in whatever facet that is for the RCMP, or when you're not in the RCMP, you feel like you have a little bit more clout or a little bit more say, a little bit more room to maneuver around and run your units. I'm assuming how you want to. My question on that is, aren't the RCMPs, are you guys trained better? Like, what I always assume is that the way it's structured right now is that when there's a big situation that comes on, like the Moncton shootings, that the RCMP have more trained expertise, and they, even if you were in an area where there was an RCMP, you guys are the ones that go in and take those tough calls because you're trained a little bit more. Or am I not, like, or would say the Vancouver Police Association, would they have just as good training?
Well, I mean, you're talking about performance and what we're capable of handling.
Yeah,
we're the federal police.
Well, it comes down to your budget and what you're able to do as well. Like when the states calls in the National Guard, or when we call in the reserves, that's, again, it comes back to maybe it's some kind of nostalgia. But like when you thought about calling the RCMP, okay, we're calling in the big boys, and shit's gonna go down.
Well, I'm not prepared really to comment on whether we're superior or not to other police forces, because I really don't know what their capabilities are as well. But I will say this: common sense would just suggest to you, if you've got a police force that pays their police officers the least, they buy the cheapest equipment, they can't replace equipment when it's expired. There's bullying and harassment issues involved. Like, how good do you think your service is?
Right?
Yeah. It just goes back to that analogy that I gave you about Wayne Gretzky. I mean, you want a police force that is, to get an optimal police force, you just have to make sure, you can't have Cadillac service on a craft in a budget.
For sure. So this is what blows me away from what's been going on in Moncton, and the trial's going on right now. It started, they set aside 2 months for it, and it's already been going for 3 weeks or so. So it's a day that will be an infamy across in Moncton for sure on June 4th, 2014. When Justin Bork shot 3 police officers, and it was besides 2005 in Mayerthorpe, it was the biggest one-day, I guess, massacre of RCMP officers. What's coming out of the trial, what blows my mind, is Mayerthorpe was in 2005. They have to, which they were ill-equipped for, as far as the C8 rifles. 2005, then they collect all the evidence. They have the same kind of trial that's going on in Moncton in 2011, and 3 years later, and at the 2011 recommendations from an outside commission, they said that all police officers have to have a C8 carbine rifle, and you have to be trained in order to use it. So almost 3 years later, they had none in Moncton. it just it goes back to your point. There's not enough money going into the RCMP to do your jobs, and 3 police officers died after 4 died years before that probably didn't have to.
I don't know what you want me to say, because I don't necessarily see it any differently than you do.
Yeah, and well, I guess
right.
Yeah,
you're right. There's no question to answer there. I think that I'll speak for my own opinion. If you look at the evidence that's coming out of the trial, the testimony of the witnesses that are being called to the stand, there's no doubt in my personal opinion mind that Commissioner Bob Paulson, who wasn't the commissioner at the time, he was told to get carbines and he didn't, and he cited several reasons for it. He cited pay as one. He also cited the concept of Mounties carrying around carbines. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that we don't need to be carrying carbines around on the street like military law here.
No, but it's supposed to be in your.
You have to have access to them.
Well, that's what I mean. It's supposed to be in your vehicles. I mean,
it's all politics, John. Well, I think it's all politics and money. And we didn't get the guns because we didn't get the money, and whatever reason they decided to politically spin that's fine. But it comes down to money, training, and resources. You roll out those carbines, you have to not only buy them, you have to create instructors, you have to train your Mounties, and then you have to recertify those Mounties on a yearly basis. And I'll tell you, that all takes money and resources that the RCMP doesn't have, because the federal government doesn't fund them properly. And if you're the commissioner, you can put whatever spin you want on that. But,
were you trained? So after Mayor Thorpe and then 2011 when they did that, were you trained by the Moncton shootings?
No.
You weren't trained at all. And I know you were going to go into a spiel here, but what was your feeling? Because if I was an RCMP officer and that happened and I wasn't getting trained, I would like, I don't feel like this could happen again. Why aren't we getting trained? Like, were you ever adamant about wanting that?
Mounties dying because of lack of resources, money, and funding has not swayed the government before to change their ways. This is a pattern we're talking about. So does it make me like? It infuriates me. It absolutely does.
Well, it infuriates me, and I like it because I live in an area that has RCMP protection, and I go and I feel and my heart, like, I just like, what the hell? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but I mean, like, there's no doubt in my mind, my personal opinion again, if we had the rollout of the carbines that we even do today, that day in Moncton would have ended up being much different. There would be more Mounties alive. That's my opinion. But let's move on from that. Until just recently, until I had to express my frustration on the news, we had Mounties in British Columbia walking around with expired bulletproof vests, and there was no replacements for those. So does it take a Mountie to get shot and killed in an expired bulletproof vest before we get some of those? Let's keep going. I've got cars in my parking lot that are miled out, meaning they should be replaced by safety standards. We have so short-handed resources in our garages here out in the West Coast that it's over a year to get those replaced. So I've got to send a Mountie to a call driving lights and siren and high speeds and corners in a miled-out police car. So does it take a Mountie to crash and end his life in that before we fix the car problem? Our guns, our Smith & Wesson guns, rated to be probably one of the most, not the highest quality of firearm that a law enforcement agency should be carrying. If you look around in Canada, all the municipal police forces are carrying different models, whether they are SIGs or whatever the case may be, because the research will tell you those are the ones based on several factors. I'll tell you why the RCMP is wearing a Smith & Wesson 9mm. It's the cheapest gun to buy for those officers. So, it's just a broken record to me. The RCMP is broken because of the failure for the federal government to keep up to date and fund it with the proper pay and resources and human resources and these things. It continues to perpetuate itself because the senior management of the RCMP doesn't express why they can't do their jobs. They just simply put their head in the sand, drink the Kool-Aid, and say everything's a good day. So ultimately, it's the frontline members who suffer. This commissioner, Commissioner Paulson, it was a lame duck commissioner. I have no problem saying that publicly. He did nothing. I think the fact that he didn't speak out here in the last months, and stick up for the true state of the force is despicable. But if you look at commissioners before him, not very many of them. Well, they've all been the same.
Well, and I was reading about Paulson and how they made. Big right now is the mental health issue, and there's, besides the fact that your pay's low, is that with the pay being low and not having the mental health services, which is a huge factor in today's world, as it should be. There was recommendations in 2003 that every 180 days he should follow up on contact, follow up on people that are out or something along those lines, and he only did it once since then. That's a lot of reports that he just doesn't even fill out.
You know what? I've done so much insulting and criticizing of Commissioner Paulson, so let me stick up for him for a minute. Let me give him a hug.
Yeah.
Commissioner Paulson is leading a broken system. It won't matter who his replacement is coming up here as well. You are simply inheriting by the systems that are designed, by the way the federal government, the Treasury Board funds the money, and all these procurement processes in place. You're designed to fail. So you could have Gandhi himself being in charge of the RCMP, and you're still not going to bring about any positive change until the government does something different. Where I become, now I'll switch gears again, where he failed me as a frontline member was he didn't speak out about the truths of how broken the system is. That he just simply said everything's perfect, and I suggest that's, for personal gain.
Well, and that's what a lot of things have been touched on, is that, and it's come out this week, as I'm sure you've heard it in the news, is that a lot of the reasons, like you say, that the commissioners aren't doing anything is that that's the system that they've been involved in and gone up through, and so it besides being struggling to change, is that why change? Again, coming back to pay, is that I was reading that the upper management got $1.7 million last year of their bonus for the upper management, which is 9% increase from the year before, and you guys are struggling on the front lines, as you say, to get 1.2 barely. That won't even keep up with inflation.
Well, it doesn't keep up with inflation, and there are many Mounties across the country that are happy with their pay, but most certainly in the areas of the country where there's a very, very high cost of living, it becomes very difficult to live here. Especially in British Columbia, it's very tough.
Well, BC, Alberta, Ontario, even. Now, to touch on that, with the news this week, they were talking about having civilian governance for the RCMP, and you talk about being a broken system, whether we should have RCMP or not. Ultimately, I'm somebody who's a truth seeker, wanting to find. We can bitch all we want, but I want solutions. Mm-hmm. So, would a civilian oversight would that help? Because I know that. So let's say like the fire department, they show up at a call, they come back, and for every hour that they spend there, that's all there is. They might have an hour of paperwork, maybe. I know from some of my buddies who would be RCMP officers, you guys are spending 3 or 4 times for every hour you would be out on a call. You're 3 or 4 hours doing paperwork at X amount of dollars per. Whatever your rate would be. So having a civilian oversight, would that help with your pay, and would that help fix a broken system? A step in the right direction to fix the broken system.
Well, but let's just talk about it generally as a broken system. I think that having civilian oversight would definitely improve the situation, for sure. I'm very supportive of that. As I was promoted through the ranks of the RCMP, let's talk about leadership, for example. I think that's a very key component to the problem of the organization is, I was promoted from a constable to a corporal. I was given those promotions. There was never really any leadership training on how to communicate with people and how to be an ethical leader. We were given a bunch of buzzwords. I was sent on a course internally for a couple of weeks, which was absolutely just one of the worst courses. There was no learned skill to take away. It was just sit there and listen to a bunch of warm and fuzzy talks. Then I was promoted to a sergeant, and I was sent on like yet another internal course. There was really no concepts or learned skill at these training seminars, and they're all put on by RCMP. What makes us so great at teaching leadership? Why are we not going out externally and getting the best leadership training that we can? And it wasn't until I went out and did my master's degree from Royal Roads that I started to understand the importance of communication, the importance of listening to people with understanding rather than evaluating them, the science behind optimal performance. And when I went there, my eyes were opened. I said, wow, we're just simply not getting it. So having civilian oversight in the RCMP, now you have people that are leadership experts that can design leadership programs. You have people that are human resources experts that can take a look at the staffing levels of the RCMP. And then having a civilian commissioner, in theory, would have some good oversight of getting rid of this drinking the Kool-Aid uniform kind of culture of the RCMP. But again, it's one thing to talk about it in theory, and it's another thing to think pragmatically how it would all roll out. Let us not forget, we had a civilian commissioner. That was right before Commissioner Paulson. That was Bill Elliott there, William Elliott, and he was a lame duck as well. And as far as I'm concerned, he didn't change very much whatsoever.
So he got into the role, and do you think that he didn't change because ultimately it's who we're surrounded by? Would that be the reason why?
I think the biggest thing that you need to consider to change the force in the right direction, you need the federal government to start putting the money and the training and the equipment and the resources in. And then you take a look at having a very tried, tested, and true ethical leader, a civilian in that position. And then you could create an operations officer who's sort of in charge of the front lines of policing for the RCP. That's your best bet. Do I have faith that all three of those things are going to happen? I just don't.
Okay.
But my hope, like you say, my hope is that as we come to these critical points and we either fail or whatever the case may be, my hope at this point is that we start taking a look at the value of jurisdictional police forces and whether the RCMP should just focus on federal policing, much like the FBI does in the United States.
Okay, well, and that's kind of one of my questions. If we get back to that, even without civilian oversight, why can't you say that you move up to the ranks and you really don't get any professional training as far as being a manager or being a leader?
Nothing that compares to what's available out externally.
So why doesn't the RCMP do that now? Like you say, if you get civilian, then you maybe go after.
My master's cost me $35,000
out of your own pocket.
Is the RCMP going to pay for every promoted leader to go away and learn at a university institution about leadership and conflict management and ethical leadership communication? They simply can't afford it.
Well, why couldn't you bring in, let's say, have a not necessarily a conference, but like 3 times a year, bring in somebody where you're into a room of 100 people who get promoted like yourself, and then you have that training? Or do you really need the one-on-one training in order to do that? Why couldn't you do that with like a bigger group?
You can't go and listen to a guest speaker and do a weekend retreat and be a different person. You can be inspired. You can be inspired very quickly, but the true learning comes from time, and also skill, like developing skill. And for leaders, in my experience, and certainly in consulting the force and their internal conflicts over the years, the number one thing that we could change to better our culture, in my opinion, is our communication with one another. We don't know how to communicate with one another. We don't have the training and advanced communication skills that we need. And but we don't do anything to teach it to our employees either. And what I mean by that is not just someone standing up talking about it and inspiring people, but also putting people through science-based education on advanced communication, putting them through actual, you know, mock-ups where they go in and they handle situations as a leader, and they can learn from their mistakes, they can learn from their best practices, they can learn as a group, they can learn as individuals. This was all done for me at a university level, and I know the military trains a lot of their officers at a university level, so why are we not getting it?
And they have civilian oversight too.
They do.
Well, and that's the other thing. So let's say you became like the FBI, because with the Moncton shootings that are going on and what's coming out in court right now is that the biggest thing is that when it started to get really serious, A, they couldn't communicate well, and then B, they had nobody had the training in order to understand how to take over a shooter situation, and so everybody was lame ducks, and it's almost lucky that only 5 people got shot and 3 people lost their lives, because it could have been way worse, because it was almost like the police, who are supposed to be the order, were in chaos themselves.
So sorry, what was the question?
Well, it's just it comes back to the training that you said. So if the RCMP became like the FBI, perhaps you would get more. You would have more people like yourself, instead of having to do the education. Perhaps that could be paid for, and at a situation like Moncton, somebody could fly in and handle the situation right away. Where the municipality police or whatever could just take hold. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of boils down to, if you take on this, we are so diverse, and we take on contracts of policing that are so different in all various corners of our country, north, south, east, and west, small towns, fly-in detachments, Mounties in the north going to work in snowmobiles, while it's just so vast that if we're not going to get the proper resources and all these things, then we're better off to back away from that and do what we can well, which is maybe federal policing, and then let the provinces take over their contract with their police. I'll be honest, if I'm out here in the Sunshine Coast, which is just north of Vancouver, beautiful little area on the west coast, if you gave me the budget and the money and the resources we're 35 members strong at our detachment. If you gave me the budget and the resources and everything for 35 members that Vancouver City Police had, and free reign to actually educate these members out here, equip them properly, like really as an autonomous police force that could hire ethical leadership people to come in and teach, optimize our performance.
Yep.
We would have a different police force overnight.
So
that's the quickest fix. That would be the quickest way to getting the residents and the population of the Sunshine Coast a much superior police force than they have now. I'd take these awesome people that we have here. I wouldn't trade a soul. They're all brilliant members, and I would just not give them broken hockey sticks, not give them broken skates, not bully them, not do all these things, right?
So you couldn't do that now because there's a lot of red tape. There'd be a lot of red tape involved in that.
We don't have the funding. We don't have the equipment, the policies, and how we change and equip and do all the Treasury Board procurement processes.
But that's what I'm getting at. Let's say the government all of a sudden said, "Okay, you guys want some money, and I understand it now. Here's some money. We can do that for you."
Fine, but in reality, I know that's not going to happen. I know it. So let's talk about it's one thing to dream, but let's dream realistically.
Yeah, for sure. That's where I'm getting.
So,
go ahead.
The union's an interesting concept as well. I think it.
Well, half's in favor, half's not in favor, and I think a lot of it comes down to what you were talking about earlier. It's so diverse all over the country that how do you do that for everybody?
I just don't think I'm happy that the NPF got their numbers, or somebody did. I was really indifferent. I'm happy that someone got their numbers to apply for certification. But I think of the union much like a mirage. We can see it in the distance. We believe it'll be a better day, but it just isn't going to be this person who comes scooping down on their cape and it just magically makes the RCMP's working conditions and all these problems go away. Again, you need money. You need money to fund the police force, and unless so, a union may be our voice for that. But again, it's important when you look at a union that you have a strong union. And if you have a weak union, it's worse than having no union at all, because now you're paying people to do nothing. And I'm not going to get involved in the present situation, but I will say this much: there are active members in the RCMP that belong to both associations that were vying for the union. How come they didn't start the no strike movement? How come they're not here on your podcast right now today, calling out the commissioner, calling out the federal government, poking things, trying to get some positive change to the organization, which in turn is a certain kind of risk for me to do that. And so, my only concept to that is, if you really want to be our union, if that's your calling, then why are you not out pushing it as vigorously and as tenaciously as some of the rest of us are? And so, again, I'll just draw it back because I don't want to start bad talking any potential unions, but it's just important that the people in those seats have the right kind of negotiation skills, the right kind of communication with senior management, but also that they have that courage of conviction to really put our issues forward.
Well, and that's you bring up a point there, because about yourself being disciplined and being put in the situation that you are in, and I, just from what I've read in our conversation, it almost seems like you're able to talk out like this because it's not that you would rather go to another police force, but the options there, and it's going to pay you more money. You love the people you're working with, but like, if I need to say something if nobody else does, and so like, why did you put it on yourself to be this vocal?
Well, I mean, it did just get to a breaking point for me. I could leave. I could quit the force and pursue other things that would be, just that would continue to. I could go, and it wouldn't be a problem for me to go into something else. It's just that when I got to that point, I said I don't care if they're firing me anymore, or if they're going to fire me. We just need to bring these issues to light. What I am grateful for and honored is the response of how it galvanized a lot of the membership to believe in themselves and to move forward with their expression and their protests. And so, I will continue to do that. I mean, even your podcast voice and ideas out there to the public so that they have a better understanding. I also think it's good for the membership to understand that, we can keep pushing forward. One of the next stages that we're considering moving with the No Strike campaign, or certainly I am, is really encouraging the members to go to their members of parliament, book a meeting with them and go there in uniform and start voicing some of their grievances to the members of parliament to be brought up in the House of Commons. Because I don't think, like, I've spoken to MPs since I've started this since we all started the No Strike movement. A lot of them claim to be kind of oblivious to the total level of dysfunction in the RCMP, the total level of discontent. So I really think when you look at it going having members from coast to coast go to their MPs, as a democratic system should be able to do, then you can start raising that voice in the areas where it's needed, because we cannot rely on our senior management to do that. That's been, in my opinion, that's been the deplorable reality that we've been facing, especially over the last few months. We've been challenging them, get out and speak. I've met with them. I've met with the senior officers of E Division, British Columbia, and I've told them, we're not looking for your ear. We're looking for your voice. If you can't replace police cars, well, then you tell the public and your politicians why you can't. You tell them why your officers are driving around in expired cars. Don't sit here silent and pretend everything's a sunny day. And I'll tell you, I'm always getting information from Ottawa and how these meetings are going, and they just don't get it, and they just don't want to get it. All they're hoping is that this thing blows over like a storm, that it loses momentum, that the dumpster's on fire, but there's rain in the forecast, kind of thing, and it's unacceptable. And I won't let it just blow over. I will continue to speak out on it.
So how do you keep this momentum? How do you keep this momentum going? Besides within the RCMP, what could somebody like who's listening to this podcast do to help your cause? And what can the RCMP do as well? So touch on both maybe.
Sure. The RCMP senior management, as we've said several times over, just needs to acknowledge the dysfunctions of their organization and where we're at. They need to fix the problems that they can, which are few, and then they need to speak out about the problems that they cannot fix, but speak out and say that this is an unacceptable state of affairs, and speak out to the government. The members need to start going to their members of parliament in person, in uniform, and getting together, go as a group of people, and start saying to these members of parliament, this is unacceptable, the working conditions that I'm in, for whatever it may be, or if it's a salary issue, and say, as a democratic elected member of parliament, I am asking you to bring this up in the House of Commons and address this problem. That's where we need to go after this. I'm not waiting. Many are waiting for the union. It's a mirage to me.
Well, and even if the union that still takes time, and you can't. As soon as you start to slow the progress that you're making, you're just going to fall backwards. So what you talk about on what management can and cannot do. So that a lot of that has come up lately is about the bullying, harassment, the mental health issues. Sexual harassment. Now, sexual harassment, I think, happens in all workplaces, so it's not just pertaining to the RCMP, and that's an issue that goes across any kind of job that you're in any service. But in touching on those things, what can upper management do and what can't they do? So maybe talk on what they can't do first, and then talk on what they can do.
Upper management can't give us. Their hands are tied in the way that they procure help and resources to fix police cars. So that's a treasury report.
So that comes down to the government, and that's where you're talking about right. Members showing up with their uniforms, talking to members of parliament. Okay, so now what can they fix?
The government cannot control having regular resources go through training, so we don't have these ebb and flows in our human resources. That has to go through the government. Now, what can the government do?
What can so you talk about upper management in the RCMP? What can they do? What problems can they fix?
They can. They may choose to lead with ethical leadership, meaning don't put the interests of your own career before the interests of the frontline officers. If there is some uncomfortable information or conversation that you have to sit with your superior in a room and say, sir, this is not a good idea. This will negatively affect the lives of thousands of officers. I don't see it this way. Engage in those uncomfortable, courageous conversations. Don't just have this mandatory optimism like, oh yeah, it doesn't affect me and I'll get my next promotion. It's a very corporate culture. And it's not just the RCMP. I'm not naive enough to know the whole world works this way. Yeah. But you need to have a little bit of courage of conviction. Also, you need to communicate to the members and the government and the press that you're dissatisfied with the status quo. You don't even have to change the fact that just saying that you think it's unacceptable is a small win, and it garners support from your frontline members. Those are things that they.
So what can when you're talking about, and again, yeah, I agree with you. It happens throughout all corporate culture. What do you say against the bullying and the harassment that goes on, and the people that speak out and get reprimanded? Or I've heard in some cases, and I was reading in some cases, that some of the upper management will not give you backup if you go on in a call and you speak out. So how does somebody speak out? And because this is a vital issue, and I think your momentum needs to be pushed forward. So what do you say to those people that go, well, if I speak out, I might go on a call and by myself, and who knows what can happen, as you know.
Well, let me take a step back there. I being involved in mediations and conflict management for the RCMP, I have been called as an expert to try and go in and at least, the very least, try and slightly improve these toxic and intractable working relationships in the RCMP. So I do feel somewhat legitimized by being able to comment about harassment and conflict and all these things in the RCMP. And the simple answer is that there are many, 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 many instances out there in the RCMP still where I am just appalled that we let RCMP members work for tyrannical leaders who just simply do not care about their best interests and are making irrational, irresponsible, and often very punitive decisions all day long against the membership. So as an organization, we certainly are behind the times when it comes to protecting our employees from these kind of bullying and tyrannical leaders.
So would a civilian, before you get on that, would a civilian oversight fix that a little bit? Or help in that instance?
I don't know. It would just have to depend on how the thing was structured. But I will say, on the flip side of that, I'm going to go a little bit on defense here for a lot of these leaders, is we also have a problem in our organization where we have employees who are not doing their jobs. Okay? They're just simply, they're bad employees. They are toxic to the work environment. They're broken for whatever reason. Some are very understandable reasons, some are not. But they just, they need to be called out on their performance. And
so why aren't they called out on their performance?
Well, they often are. But what's happened now is this harassment issue very quickly becomes a catch-all for these members who are being called out on their performance. So I have also encountered situations where, members of the RCMP are saying they're being harassed. And when you get right down into the weeds and find out what's going wrong, they're merely being held accountable for their lack of performance or their toxic behavior or whatever the case may be. So, it is a delicate thing, harassment and bullying in the RCMP, as it's a double-edged sword. You want to rid your organization of it, but you also want to be able to hold your employees accountable for poor performance, and it's a delicate dance along that way. And I don't sit here and claim to know that I would do everything right all the time, but you do have to be driven ethically, not power hungry and ego based as you go into these types of situations. It's not about winning or losing. It's about understanding each other and hopefully pushing each other towards something better. And a lot of the times what happens in conflict, certainly in the RCMP, is we get caught up in our egos. We're wanting to win the fight rather than get to a better state of affairs by understanding each other.
And is that indicative based on the kind of person that would join the RCMP, and just because you have that kind of mentality, or just your personality, and who, like, does that come out more often in RCMP officers?
Perhaps. I used to be an absolutely terrible communicator who was an ego-based leader. I really was. I did not start my career off in leading well. What it's indicative, though, of is, you can go out and get that kind of training, and you can go out and change yourself.
Which is what you got when you went to do your master's.
Absolutely, it was personal transformation for me. It didn't just make me a better leader; it made me a better me, made me a better husband, made me a better son. I enjoy my life better. I internalize things better. So that's another concept that as a leader of this organization, what you have to understand is your frontline Mounties every day, they're going out into the world and they're dealing with broken people in their broken circumstances. And a lot of the times what happens is, day after day, week after week, that constant exposure to negativity, it affects some people, and they too become broken.
Well, it doesn't affect just some people. I mean, you see the worst of the worst all the time.
That's right.
And so that it's not just somebody that has to affect everybody on a personal level. It cannot affect you on a personal level.
That's right. So you become sort of broken yourself, and you would only hope, and the way I kind of look at it here is, even in the Sunshine Coast, if you go to a bad call, you should be able to come back and be nurtured by your leadership. You should be able to come back and be comforted and encouraged and just somebody there that helps you through that journey and each other. But what often happens is it just is the opposite. You go to say 100 police officers and you ask them, what is a more tense environment for you, to be in your office or to be out on the road dealing with the people that are the calls?
And they'd say the
And
opposite.
you'll find it's an appalling number of people that would rather be out on the road than avoid their offices at all costs because of the toxic environment that's there. That should be opposite, right? That should not be the same.
Well, from what you guys, because I have a couple really close buddies who are RCMP officers, and I know some of the things that you would see on a day-to-day basis, or some of the crazy stuff you should see, and nobody, like, you cannot come away from that and not have to talk to somebody, and like, is that still a big stigma in the RCMP of being a tough guy? Because it is like going to war sometimes. Some of the things that you would see, like PTSD coming back from there.
We need to be better at not just communicating how we're feeling, but we need to be more nurturing in helping those who do communicate about how they're feeling, not putting them under that stigma. Now, we had a mental health rollout. I actually took the training. It was, this was their response to try and improve mental health. And it was a one-day training course. And actually, I enjoyed the concepts of the training. But again, you can't send a Mountie for a half-day training course on the road to mental health readiness, is what they called it, and expect them to be transformed or walk away with any learned skill. Can I take you, look how important it is, right? Can I take you for a half day and teach you a major component of your job?
No.
You can't do that. So you can't expect that there would be any kind of cultural change from a half-day course. But in Commissioner Paulson's defense, he doesn't have the money or resources to do anything more than that. You can't have Cadillac quality of service or Cadillac skills with a craft dinner budget, and that just brings us back.
Well, and again, yeah, and that's what comes when I started to do some more reading on because you're all the way on the West Coast, and I had no idea who Chris Backus would be. And then when I brought up about pay, I'm a level-headed guy, but some people would go, well, geez, these RCMP officers, they're making X amount of dollars, especially in the Maritimes, which would have less money and less cost of living than you guys. Well, geez, they're making that much money. But and I come back to, again, thinking about the RCMP of a top echelon, or not even RCMP, but like police services. And and the thing is that I knew that asking for pay, it wasn't the whole story. There's and then you see the government that's going this far in debt, and we need to focus on innovation, and which is all fine things, but our basic services are getting cut tremendously, and in a time in the world where Donald Trump is the president, and we have chaos on the far left and far right wing idealisms. We need some more money into trainings, not just to protect, but like we've been talking about, the mental health issues, and like that to me. So besides the Moncton shooting and not having the equipment available, more knowledge now that we have on concussions and mental health and how much that affects your job. The fact you guys aren't getting anything, it blows my mind, because you guys see some crazy stuff.
Yeah, it blows mine too. I mean, it does. But, at the end of the day, this is what the whole, just getting back to it, it's a whole point for the call for something to be different. And, I hate to kind of short Jonathan, because my back is starting to get pretty sore. So if you had maybe like a couple of other things that, you just wanted to end with, but I'd probably tell you I got about 5 minutes left here. I'm just...
That's what I was just about to roll into that. So
okay.
I think what you're trying to get at, and what people should do, is when they see an officer without his stripes on, they should go up and have a conversation with them and say what can I do? What could I help? Maybe some of the public could go to phone their MPs and say, hey, why aren't I? Because you always hear that from people who are in areas that say, "Geez, I wish there was more police presence." Well, there's a great
Mm.
reason why. So phone the MPs and let them know.
Yeah.
So to leave on that, what's one? We're going to leave on two things. The first being is I want you to comment on what is the lasting say that you want to get out of this to anyone who's listening, whether be it an RCMP officer, be it a regular civilian. What voice do you want? What out of your voice? What do you want to project and tell everybody?
I would just want them to know that your federal police force, the frontline members, are amazing men and women who want nothing more than to do their jobs, protect Canadians. They put their lives on the line to keep Canadians safe, and they've been doing so for many, many years. But the candle is burning at both ends. And the federal police force, because of the lack of support from the federal government, the Treasury Board, and the senior management of the RCMP not telling the truth about it, the federal police force is coming to a breaking point. It is in crisis. And so either we need to fix that, or we need to take a look at whether the federal police force should no longer be involved in contract policing. But to continue on, to not do anything, to continue on with the status quo, it's like driving down the highway at 100 kilometers an hour in the fog. When are we going to go sort of off the road here? And it's never been this bad in my 18-year career. I've never seen it this bad. And so I'm asking, we're all asking for help. We're asking either let us go and be jurisdictional police where we can get the right kind of support, or fix the RCMP. But we're really at a breaking point and it can't keep going the way that it's going.
Okay, now let's. This is something that I kind of wanted to end on, and it's great that you brought in the Gretzky reference because this is a sports reference. I don't know if you know who Jimmy V is, but he gave this passionate speech way back in the day, and he thinks that a full life for a person, because you RCMP officers, you're people, just you're part of society. You feel just like anybody else. So the three things he talks about is if you laugh, think, and you have some kind of emotion that overwhelms you in a good, positive way, it's a good day for anybody. So I want you to tell me those, and then we'll end on this. So what? So the laugh thing. What do you get out of going every day your job? What's the best part of your job every day that brings a little bit of joy?
The best part of my day, I always tell my guys at the office, I say, it may be an incredibly broken organization, and I know you're all frustrated, and I know you're all thinking, but within our detachment right now, what are some of the things that we can do to reflect positively and give ourselves a sense of professional purpose? How can we have fun? How can we keep going so that we're sort of sheltering ourselves and making ourselves as healthy as we can? And some of the incredibly creative and bright ideas that come out of my members' mouths and their imaginations on in this despicable time of working conditions, they still want to come to work, they still want to do a good job, and they tend, for in some miraculous way, they make life fun and lighthearted at work. And that I'm forever grateful for that. That is what keeps us going. If I was to have left the RCMP today, if I was to go out, I would thank the organization for nothing. But I would, other than I've met some incredible men and women, is certainly on the front lines, that it was an absolute pleasure to be with.
So what do you think about every day? What keeps you up at night thinking about your job, or something that drives you to want to be better, to be an RCMP officer?
My job is to make sure that those under my command have a sense of professional purpose, where they feel themselves truly engaging in what they do. They're happy in their professional roles in life, and that I can help them get where they want to go, and notice the progress along the way, and feel like they're part of a cohesive kind of family, a working family, I like to call it at work. And so if I can feel that human level of leadership with my guys, that's for me my professional purpose.
And then lastly, give me an example if you can about something that you were just like, damn, I'm glad I'm an RCMP officer today. Just an instant that you were like, this is what I joined it up for. This is what I joined to be an RCMP officer for. This is why I wear this uniform.
Right. Well, I mean, again, I care deeply about protecting Canadians, and so I've had pride for this the Mountie outfit. I've had pride for the Red Surge, and so protecting Canadians and seeing that we can still continue to do the best job we can in these conditions. I mean, that is, I guess you'd say, fulfilling. Certainly, being overseas and working for the United Nations as an RCMP officer was an incredibly life-changing journey for me as well, and I was grateful that the Mounties were engaged in that kind of international mandate.
Chris, I'd like to thank you for coming on my podcast today, and I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best in your pursuit, and I hope that your protest and the stance that you're taking, that this is just a stepping stone, and it starts to we start to get the RCMP unit that Canada deserves. So,
yeah, thanks, and thanks for having us and giving us this sort of stage to get our voice out.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, buddy.